So in this video, we're going to get started with coding and triggering those animations. Okay, so I've coded just a very simple page that has a couple of divs with some boxes in them. And let me just show you what they do. So this one showing some motion, it's changing the size of the font and it's changing the opacity of the box. And then this one continually works as long as you are clicking the button, as you can see. Let's see why these work this way. All right, so here's my HTML page. Very simple. I just have coded in the buttons, the divs that have the animation areas are just the things with the boxes here. I'm sorry, just the things with the borders, the areas with the borders. And then the little boxes themselves are things like animate 1 and 2. Just to show you the CSS, very simple here. The one thing I do want to point out though, anything that you want to move, you must give it some kind of position. So the reason for that is that by default, HTML elements have a position of static. Static means it's not going to move anywhere. So if you want to actually perform motion animations on whatever the element is, you have to give it some kind of position, whether that's relative, absolute, just something so that it's not the default static. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's a really easy kind of troubleshooting thing. If you're trying to do your animation and you know you've got it coded right, but it's still not moving, you may need to go to your CSS and add in the position relative. So that's really important. Make sure that you do that. Notice I've just given them heights and widths, made them inline blocks, and then just color coding. So nothing super complicated here. Okay, so finally, let's go take a look at our JavaScript code. And even this is not very complicated. And that's what I was saying in the introductory video. There are a lot of preset functions that have been created, developed over time to make animation a whole lot easier because it's something that people are interested in doing. So let me just show you how this is working. So in the first case, and that's the one that does this, okay, that's right here. It's just basically looking, and again, this is our document ready function. Remember, this is that continuously active structure. So it's just looking for a click to happen on the button called Start One, and that's this button. And then once that happens, it's going to launch this function. And this is just a one of those anonymous functions that we just calculate and execute right away as it's created. And it's basically just targeting the element animate 1, and that is this red box, and then it is performing the animate method. Now this is a jQuery method, so this is something that's part of the jQuery library to make animation simpler, and it basically has a whole bunch of properties, and those properties are the typical CSS properties that you would expect. Now, not every single CSS property works in here, but I tried to give you a nice little menu of ones that definitely do. It's going to set the left position. It's going to change that to 250 pixels. It's going to reduce the opacity from 1 to 0.5. And remember, opacity goes from 0 to 1. It's percentages, basically. So it's going to be a 50%. It's going to set the height. It's going to increase the height from 100 pixels to 150. It's going to increase the width from 100 pixels to 150. And it's going to change the font size to 3 EM. And that's basically just making the font really large. So notice this whole set of commands, of properties actually, is the first value being passed. This is the first parameter being passed into the animate method, right? So notice the little squiggle brackets there. All of that functions as one unit that's being passed into the animate method. It's basically an object, and we've talked about objects before. So there's the animate method has the capacity to accept in data from an object that has these properties that look like CSS properties, right? And then it knows what to do once it sees each of those, property values, it sets those, et cetera, and so forth. The second parameter it accepts is the speed at which it performs the animation, right? And there are there are names, slow and fast, you can use, but you can also put in a numeric value in milliseconds. So 1000 would be 1 millisecond. 2,000 would be 2 seconds, 3,000 would be 3 seconds, right? So the values go in milliseconds. You can also use slow and fast. And just to give you a sense of what those look like, let's reset the page here. So that's slow. And then let's change this to fast. And you can see the difference there in the fast, right? Now, like I said, we can change that to, and I'm going to do this, the 3 seconds. So this would be really slow, honestly, in computer time. So we'll reset that. And you see how really slow that goes to take 3 seconds to do these things, okay? So you can, and again, you can put in as many of those properties as you want. Notice also that you do need to use the camel case when doing something that's got two words like font size. Some things that you can't animate are background image, background color, and font color. The reason for that is, if you think about it, animations need to function, well, at least the way this method works, it needs to function so that you can have a clear transition from one value to another, right? It makes sense if you're going from a left of 0 to a left of 250 pixels, that you can see how you can do that. But if you've got one image and you're changing to another image, it's not like it's a number that you can go from one to the other. So just the way that method works, it needs to take in numerical data that it can create a range from and make a transition from one to the other. So some of those properties just don't lend themselves to that, and then thus you can't animate those in this way. You can kind of fall back on some more old-fashioned ways of animating things to do that, where you're moving step by step, stage to stage. We'll see an example of that later, but this is a super flexible function that does a ton of different things, and so there's a lot of possibility even just with this nice preset animate method that you can use. Okay, now the second one here is this button, and as you saw, this one actually continues to work as you keep clicking it. Again, I'm using the animate method, but I'm doing some slightly different things here. So I'm setting the opacity to 0.05. We've done that before, but here's the different thing. So some of these properties can accept additional functionality in them, and that's what I wanted to show you here. So in this case, with the width, we're actually toggling the width. That's why it continues to work and go back and forth. And when you say toggle, it basically is going to pull it down to 0, right? Like that's the toggle value, is to make it go all the way to 0 and then back to where it began. And the idea of swing is just the type of transition that it's going to use. Okay, and the last thing is looking for a click on this box. So we haven't looked at this one yet, but let's see what this does. Okay. Now, as I continue to click it, it continues to move. So that should give you some ideas, and here's why it does that. So each time you're clicking that, it's changing the top value, and if you increase the top value, that's going to push the shape down, right? And it's increasing it by 100 pixels, and then it's going to change the height explicitly to 80 pixels. So it's not going to keep getting shorter and shorter, okay, but it's going to switch to 80. And I have it set on a really slow 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. So here's what I want to point out is this plus equal. So that's going to dynamically, that's why it keeps doing it. If I had set it to 100 pixels, it's just going to do it once. It's just going to move it once down 100 pixels. But by setting it to plus equal 100 pixels, that's what enables it to continue moving. So that's really important. Okay. And then notice how it sort of disappears. That was just a CSS thing. So if you take a look in the animation area, I have this line here, overflow hidden. So that's an easy way of sort of keeping things from going over your boundaries. It's actually still there on the page. It's just basically hidden behind, the rest of the content on the page. So if you want to keep your shapes from moving outside of a certain boundary, this can be one way to do it. Now, sometimes that's not ideal because you need things to actually stay inside the boundary, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, about how you can actually keep something inside a boundary. But an easy way, if it doesn't matter if it goes outside the boundary, is just to use this overflow hidden in your CSS, and then it'll just disappear and you're done. That's the last one. And I just wanted to point out this really important thing of how to continue causing a transformation by using the plus equal. You can also use minus equal. Okay, and we'll talk about moving things in all 4 directions in another video in the module. So that's a real basic overview to coding and triggering animations. I'm just showing you a few so that you can go and experiment with some of the other methods that are available in jQuery. And there is a link to those other methods listed under this video on YouTube or on the page that you're accessing it from the course page that you're accessing it from. So please do check those out, and you want to use some different methods that we haven't covered in your first demonstration assignment.